Fighting for your life against an angry bear is no easy feat, even if you're properly armed. When Lee Francis was attacked by an enormous grizzly, he quickly whipped out his pistol, thinking the gun might help, and it did, only not in the way Francis expected it to. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. It was Friday, October 21st, 2022, when Lee Francis and his son set out to do some elk hunting. The 65-year-old dentist and his son, Josh Francis, who was also a dentist, weren't inexperienced. In fact, the opposite is quite true. They were avid hunters. As a testimony to his love for hunting, Lee Francis always shared photos of himself and his newest prey with his Facebook friends. Elk and deer weren't too big of a challenge for the Wyoming-based dentist. He had taken on even bigger, scarier animals. One photo on his personal Facebook page shows the man smiling to the camera, his hand proudly touching a huge dead grizzly. Considering their experience and the joy they found in hunting, Lee Francis and his son started their elk hunting trip confidently. In fact, they were well prepared to take on any potential danger. Francis and his son had some scary encounters in the recent past. Only a month before, in September, the two of them were on a hunting trip when they attracted the attention of not one, but two curious and maybe hungry bears. While the 65-year-old and his son were on the bow hunting trip, they stumbled upon a bear. They managed to scare the animal by hitting sticks together. The noise was enough to make the bear leave. But it wasn't the end of their adventure that September. Soon enough, Lee Francis and his son were stunned to see another bear taking an interest in them. This time, the animal came into their camp and scared the men's horses. The two encounters were enough to convince Francis he needed to take some extra safety measures. Yes, he had his trusted bow, but a pistol would certainly do better in the eventuality of a bear attack. So the man purchased a handgun and started carrying it while hunting. It made him feel safer, and understandably so. On October 21, 2022, the two men had the Rock Creek area in Sublette County, Wyoming, as a hunting ground. They were south of Grand Teton National Park, a part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The whole area is rich and abundant in wildlife. There are thousands of different species of plants, hundreds of bird species, and dozens of species of mammals, not to mention the fish, the reptiles, and the amphibians. It's paradise on Earth, with some of the most intact habitats. The list of animals that find their home in Sublette County goes on and on and on. You'll find elk, moose, mule deer, pygmy rabbits, bald eagles, wolves, lizards, grizzly bears, and so many more. The land is old, and evidence shows that humans have been living off it since at least 11,000 years ago. Our ways of procuring food, clothes, and warmth may have changed, but some people still enjoy ancient practices such as hunting in order to feel more connected to their roots. They accept hunting as a natural human activity. Dr. Lee Francis and her son were among those people. When they started their hunting trip on that Friday back in October 2022, they had no way to know their fear of being attacked would come true, not until it was almost too late. The two men had at least one horse, and they were looking for elk. At some point, they split up, perhaps to cover a larger area, but they weren't too far away from each other. That evening, 65-year-old Lee Francis was walking, focusing on finding some suitable animals. He was engrossed in his task, and maybe that's why he didn't realize he'd gotten too close to a cave. Coming across the cave was an accident, but by the time the hunter realized this, the horrifying events of the evening were already in motion. Lee Francis looked around, weary of being so close to the cave. Caves are a fan favorite among bears. They provide a safe space, a suitable den for hibernating and for having their cubs. When the man looked around him, he saw a massive grizzly. Time stopped for a few moments. The animal was huge, a beast of old. It looked like it weighed around 700 pounds, and it stood 8 feet tall. It was an awe-inspiring, frightening sight. And to Francis's despair, the animal was standing merely 10 feet away. The man instantly knew that whatever time he had to defend himself, it was short, maybe too short to really make a difference. But the angry grizzly didn't leave Francis too much time to contemplate his potential actions. It was now or never. It was do or die. The giant beast charged toward the man, its beady eyes full of rage. 65-year-old Francis had no choice but to defend himself by fighting back. He whipped out his pistol, the one he had gotten to protect himself from awful encounters, just like this one. And he fired, but it didn't deter the animal. Instead, the grizzly approached furiously, its pace quick. Its steps made the very earth tremble. The bear came flying at the man, and Francis was now prey. He made the mistake of taking the animal by surprise, and bears are notorious for turning murderous when startled. Francis fell on his back. His position was a dangerous one. It exposed all the soft, important bits of the body to the grizzly. The animal was only inches away from tearing the man apart with its powerful jaws and sharp claws. But the man fought for his life. When the bear's giant head came close to the man, Francis's natural reaction was to kick it away from him. And that's exactly when the man's pistol made a difference, albeit not in the manner Francis might have been expecting when he first purchased the handgun. At the exact same moment the man's foot connected with the bear's skull, Francis shot his pistol. But the situation was chaotic, the movements too erratic, and the man's aim proved to be a little off. Instead of shooting the grizzly, the man shot himself in the lower leg. It hurt, but when Francis saw the outcome, he was probably willing to accept the pain. The giant 700-pound grizzly was frightened by the sound, and some of the rounds did hit it, scaring it off. The massive animal ran away, leaving a wounded Francis in need of medical assistance. Josh Francis rushed to help his father, who was hurt and still in shock, bleeding on the ground. The younger man was able to provide some first aid to his father. Francis's son used sticks and a belt to help stop the bleeding. Then he helped lead Francis onto a horse. Josh then used a satellite phone to call for help. It was just before 6 p.m. The two men headed toward a nearby lake called Water Dog Lake, where rescue crews were waiting to pick them up. After they got there and met the rescue crews, they traveled another 6 miles by a utility terrain vehicle. Finally, they got to the air ambulance that was waiting to fly Lee Francis to the University of Utah Hospital in Salt Lake City. Lee Francis had to get 2 surgeries on his lower leg. Wildlife officials weren't able to locate the bear because it was snowing, but they planned to resume the search the following Monday. When asked about his scary encounter with the giant of a beast, Lee Francis said he'd been around big bears before, but having one of them charging you is a whole different deal. And although his body was healing from the trauma, Francis admitted to being mentally scarred by the encounter. "I'll probably have a nightmare or two the next time I'm out in the mountains," the man told reporters. Lee Francis also shared his advice to other people. Carry bear protection. Bear attacks happen so quickly. It was September 2021 when Sam Kezar and his friend Jared went to Wyoming, just outside the Yellowstone National Park, for some elk hunting. The two of them were experienced hunters, and they knew how to get what they wanted. They also knew they were hunting in bear country, so safety was a top priority to both of them. In fact, that was part of the reason Jared was there in the first place, to provide aid in the eventuality of a bear attack. This doesn't mean Kezar wasn't very well prepared on his own. As it turned out, the opposite was quite true, but no one should ever refuse any additional safety measure. Back in 2016, Kezar decided he wanted to take on elk hunting. He was a professional man, an arborist, and a family man. Kezar never said no to house chores, but he was also a passionate hunter. When he wasn't working or spending time with his family, Kezar was either shooting his bow for practice, hunting, or thinking about hunting. Once he decided to get into elk hunting, Sam Kezar started his meticulous process of getting information. He wanted to learn everything about it and also make sure he would be able to do it himself. For 3 years, he went to Colorado before finally killing his first bull. After that, he knew that elk hunting would become a fixed occurrence in his life. He drew pleasure from it. It was a way to connect to nature and to himself. After all, hunting requires sharp instincts. In 2021, Sam Kezar drew a Wyoming tag for a unit right outside Yellowstone. The South Dakota-based man was going to hunt near one of the most famous national parks in the entire world. But while he knew the land was rich in beauty and teeming with elk, Kezar also knew he was going to venture into grizzly country. And while grizzly attacks are rare, they're always a possibility. And when they happen in a flash. Kezar knew that there's no room for hesitation or mistakes in bear country. He had to be prepared for an attack. That's why as soon as he knew for sure he was going to hunt in Wyoming, the man went to Shields and bought a Glock Model 20 10mm. It wasn't an uneducated purchase. In fact, the detail-oriented man had previously researched the best choices for protection in bear country, and his research had pointed toward the Glock Model 20 10mm. It was allegedly the best overall choice when dealing with bear country. Kezar also bought the only box of ammo available, 180-grain full metal jackets. After some more research, Sam came to the conclusion that having a gun in a hip holster or in a backpack wasn't the best decision. He found another alternative. The man purchased the marsupial gear harness, which had a soft holster system and enabled him to have a right-hand draw right on his belly. Since owning a gun and actually shooting one are far from being the same things, Kezar started practicing straight away. He spent every day shooting the 10mm. The man would practice and then practice some more. He'd practice drawing, getting his grip, and obtaining his target. He spent the summer shooting his gun and his bow. When the end of the summer approached, Kezar went and bought another box of ammo and started live fire practice in his backyard. He knew every second was crucial when it comes to bear attacks. That's why the man tried to prepare himself for a sudden attack. Kezar would practice not being aware and then having to react very fast, as if in a life-or-death situation. Finally, September came around, and so did the hunting trip. Sam Kezar was joined by his friend Jared and left for Wyoming. Both men had bows, both men had guns, and both men had bear spray. The first day of their hunting trip was exciting, but fruitless. They were surrounded by white bark pine and little groves of heavy spruce. At one point during the day, Kezar shot a bull elk, but the animal didn't die. Instead, it took off. The men lost the herd, but returned the following day to try and find it again, but it was as if the animals had vanished. Kezar and Jared decided to drive to some higher ground and try their luck there. They got out of the car and started trekking, always mindful of their surroundings. As they walked, the two men found fresh bear feces. They had to be ready for anything. They kept walking, and then there it was, another sign. This time, the men spotted big scratches on a tree. Finally, they walked through thick timber into an opening. There was even thicker spruce in front of them, but there was no time for them to take in their surroundings. They both heard it at the same time, the sound of rustling, and then a mighty roar, louder than anything they've ever heard. Sam Kezar had killed 2 black bears with his bow before, but this was different. This was a massive, angry grizzly bear coming charging at him. Both Kezar and Jared yelled out, "Bear!" As Kezar yelled, he realized he was holding something. He realized he had his bow in his left hand and his gun in his right hand. He had no recollection of drawing the gun, but the man knew that his instinct had acted before he could consciously figure it out. Those long months of practice were paying off. As he watched the grizzly coming at him, Sam Kezar thought it was maybe only bluffing. He fired his gun, putting a round at the bear's feet to scare it away, but the bear wasn't fazed at all. That's when the man knew it was no bluff after all. The huge animal kept charging, running full speed. Kezar's hand moved out of instinct again. The man started firing round after round as quickly as he could, as accurately as he could. Sam could see the animal's fur ripple at least twice. He knew he managed to hit it, but the animal was still coming. And then Sam felt himself falling backwards. As soon as he saw the animal charging, Jared, who was only a few steps from Kezar and a little to the man's left, took a hold of the pepper spray. The man then took the safety off the pepper spray, deploying it. But Mother Nature had other plans. The breeze changed its direction. Instead of reaching the bear, the spray came back into Jared's face. But the man was quick to think and to act. As soon as the pepper spray hit him in the face, he managed to fire 2 shots at the bear. The bear stopped. Jared's bullet had just pierced its chest. The animal turned to run away, and Kezar shot it one more time in its hind end. The animal stopped, sitting on its back haunches some 90 yards away from the men. Kezar and Jared started yelling at it to try and make it go away. When he saw the bear wasn't budging, Kezar pulled the trigger again. Finally, the grizzly walked back into the trees where it took its last breath. Kezar and Jared alerted authorities, who then started an investigation. The state warden told Kezar that while he had the right to protect his life, the case had to be treated as a federal investigation because Kezar might have killed an endangered species. Soon enough, the authorities came to the conclusion that Kezar had acted in self-defense. They also determined that the grizzly was in fact a sow. It was 18 to 20 years old and had recently had 1 cub, whose paw prints were found at the scene. Sadly, killing the sow meant the cub was most likely going to die soon after. Without its mother's milk, the cub had virtually no chance of surviving. Sam was sad about the cub, but he was also glad he had taken the time to practice shooting. The man was proud he'd been able to protect himself when it mattered most. In fact, even authorities had marveled at his abilities. They told him that his quick actions had definitely saved his life. Out of the 7 bullets Kezar shot, 3 of them pierced the bear. It was October 13, 2018, and hunting season was on. Bob Lagassa was a lifelong hunter, and he enjoyed nothing more than being in the mountains, far away from the maddening rush of modern life. The 57-year-old man loved the outdoors and all it had to offer. There was nothing quite like having your senses completely bewitched by nature. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the primal need to act according to instinct. Lagassa loved it all. He was a devoted hunter. When he killed an animal, Lagassa felt a sense of pride and accomplishment at the thought of being a provider for him and his family. In October 2018, Lagassa traveled from his home in Hayden, Idaho, to Montana with only one purpose: hunting for elk. It wasn't his first rodeo. Lagassa was joined by his friend and Montana hunting guide, Greg Gibson. In early October, Lagassa, who was a filmmaker, had co-opted Gibson for one of his projects. The 2 men released a short video on the effective use of Bearspray, starring none other than Gibson. The video provided viewers with some precious advice. Gibson advised viewers to always be aware of their surroundings. Even more, he underlined the importance of deploying the Bearspray in a tactical manner. As such, while Bearspray deployed at close range could still be effective, it's definitely better to deliver it sooner. This gives it enough time to really affect the bear's vision and breathing and make it stop its charge before actually making contact. It was sound advice, and it clearly indicated that both Gibson and Lagassa knew what they were doing. They were no rookies. Lagassa and Gibson arrived in the area they'd chosen for hunting, just outside the unincorporated community of Gardner in Park County, Montana, and near Yellowstone National Park. The 2 men set out, intent on finding a herd of elk. Killing a rutting bull elk is one of the favorite challenges of hunters. As the 2 men walked, they took in their surroundings. They knew they had to pay attention to any little evidence that something had changed. Sharp senses are among a hunter's greatest assets, and while taking precautions is always a must when you find yourself in the middle of nature, the unexpected has the upper hand. Bob and Greg were walking through tall sagebrushes when suddenly they had to stop in their tracks and face a predator like no other. There it was, a 500-pound grizzly sow and its 2-year-old cub. some 36 feet away from the hunters. All of them, men and creatures alike, stood still for a second, too startled to move. But their stunned state was interrupted when the grizzly cub decided it was scared. The cub reared up on its haunches. It wanted to leave. The cub then let out a terrifying growl, which worked as a trigger for the grizzly sow. The sow charged, running straight at Bob Lagassa. Lagassa didn't even have enough time to reach his bear spray, but both he and Gibson started screaming like maniacs, hoping to scare the grizzly away. It didn't work. For a moment, though, Lagassa dared to hope the grizzly was only bluffing, but it very soon became obvious the sow's protective nature was fully at work, and it wanted nothing more than to tackle and destroy Lagassa, its perceived threat. Lagassa had time for one last goofy thought before he was knocked to the ground. The bear kind of looked like a football player tackling someone. Then the 57-year-old man found himself on the ground. Lagassa had enough time to get his arm up and somehow protect his face, but the grizzly opened its jaws and grabbed Lagassa's left arm in its mouth. It then started clawing at the man's face. It wanted nothing more than to maul him. But Lagassa was not alone. He had a hunting partner, another person who could intervene and hopefully get him away from the crazed animal. Greg Gibson, who was only a few steps behind Lagassa, didn't just watch in shock as his friend was being mauled by the grizzly. Instead, the man managed to get his bear spray out. Then Gibson gave one shot to the bear. Obviously affected by the bear spray, the grizzly stopped its attack on Lagassa, but it didn't back away immediately. Instead, the bear switched its target. It now wanted Greg Gibson. Once again, Gibson was able to deploy the bear spray. It was enough to make the grizzly and its cub run away. The men were safe, but Bob Lagassa was quite sure his arm was broken, and both of them caught some of the chemical in their own eyes. Partially blinded by the bear spray and covered in blood, Lagassa and Gibson hiked out. Despite the fact that he was just attacked by a huge grizzly, Lagassa felt like the bear spray was worse. It was the most irritating feeling he could imagine. Soon after, Bob Lagassa went to the emergency room in the nearby city of Livingston. Doctors decided to have him transported by ambulance to the hospital in Bozeman. Lagassa's left arm injury was too severe. Once he got to the hospital in Bozeman, the man received a tetanus shot and started rabies treatment. He also had to get surgery on his arm. Lagassa was discharged soon after. He wrote a Facebook post about his scary encounter, but he didn't get the reactions he'd quite expected. According to Lagassa, he was targeted by groups that oppose hunting and the vegan community. The man received over 14,000 messages, mostly from people telling him he was at fault for the attack. The backlash that followed was totally surprising. Just the vulgarity. It was the nastiest stuff you could think of. Death wishes, you name it. Mostly from groups that oppose hunting and the vegan community. On the other hand, I got a lot of support from others, but it was definitely overwhelming, Lagassa said. Despite these reactions, the man told reporters he wouldn't stop hunting. "I'm going to get back on that horse and ride. This is in my DNA. Being in the mountains is good for my soul. I'm just counting the days until I get back out there." Lagassa followed through with his promise. Soon after the attack, the man went back hunting. Months after the attack, in February 2019, Lagassa traveled to New York for an interview with Animal Planet. Despite his fears that the show would put an anti-hunting spin on the story, Lagassa decided he needed a platform to spread some messages which he deemed important. He wanted to emphasize that, in his view, people hunt for a lot of reasons, and none of them are evil. Even more, Lagassa hoped to underline the importance of carrying bear spray. It should be the first line of defense, he said. It just gives you a better option than shooting. And at least in Lagassa's case, this statement stands true. Because the bear was on top of Lagassa, Gibson wouldn't have been able to safely shoot the bear without potentially risking his friend's life. But what do you think? Do you think that in this case, a gun would have helped? Let us know in the comments. It was mid-October 2018, and things were looking gloomy on Lawrence Michalchuk's property in Bella Coola, British Columbia, Canada. Michalchuk and his wife had just returned from a week-long trip. They had been eager to see and embrace their children, to tell them about their trip and relish in some quality family time. But there was bad news to be shared first. Michalchuk's in-laws, who had spent the week taking care of the kids, told the couple about a family of grizzlies who had decided to make a home out of Michalchuk's yard. A sow and her 3 cubs had been wreaking havoc on the property. The bears would come daily, attracted by the various fruit trees on the property. They would climb the trees, eat the fruit, they would dig holes looking for roots, and they would leave scat all over the yard. It was getting harder to get outside. The kids were scared, and nothing Michalchuk's in-laws had done to scare the bears away had worked. The older couple had tried to scare the bears away by shaking a bucket of nuts and bolts, but were unsuccessful. The bears were fearless and territorial. The animals seemed to think Michalchuk's family was trespassing their property, and not the other way around. Something had to be done if they came back. Grizzly bears are tough, fast, and resilient. They are some of the largest subspecies of brown bear, and they are nothing short of fierce. They're great fighters, especially when it comes to protecting their young. And while many people can't comprehend living that close to such predators, grizzlies are a common occurrence in Bella Coola, British Columbia. Bella Coola is a hotspot for human-bear interaction. With its lush trees and its generous river, it's easy to see why Bella Coola is a luxuriant paradise for humans and bears alike. Wild animals abound, which makes the community a tourist hotspot. Bear safaris and tours are a big thing in Bella Coola. Because of this, some argue, grizzlies in the area have grown bolder, no longer fearing humans the way they should. Which means, of course, that unwanted bear encounters are also on the rise. Lawrence Michalchuk couldn't let the mother grizzly and her 3 cubs take control. He feared something awful could happen. His children were young, and his daughter was particularly terrified of the animals. His family had been attacked by bears before, with his daughter suffering the brunt of it. His daughter's arm was badly injured during that previous bear encounter. Michalchuk feared the worst. Grown-ups are easy targets for grizzlies as it is. Children are not even a nuisance. The 54-year-old man had to protect his family. If the bears were to return, he told himself, he would not let them roam freely. As you can expect by now, the bears returned the following morning. They were beautiful creatures, no doubt, as they slowly made their way out of the pines and toward the fruit trees. Michalchuk didn't want to harm the animals, but he had to make them understand they weren't wanted. The man grabbed his shotgun, which was loaded with birdshot, and stepped outside. His wife and children stayed inside the house, watching from a window. His wife decided to film the whole encounter. Lawrence Michalchuk didn't want to take any unnecessary risks. He didn't want to traumatize his children. The man went outside and stood below his front deck. His dog was there too, brave enough to join its owner in this mission. Michalchuk took a deep breath and then fired his first shot in the air, his first attempt at driving the bears away. He hoped the noise would be enough, and the whole ordeal would end as fast as it started. His hope couldn't have been any farther from the truth. The grizzly sow didn't plan to leave without a fight. The animal came charging at Michalchuk. Terrified, the man ran as fast as he could back inside the house. After a while, though, the sow and her cubs started walking away. Michalchuk took it as a good sign. Maybe the animals had finally understood they weren't wanted. Maybe they were walking away for good this time. With the bears now departing, Michalchuk thought they could do with some more encouragement. Once again, he stepped outside, shotgun at the ready. He shot another round in the air, again in an effort to keep the sow moving along. But this seemed to be a bad move on the man's part. The sow turned around, ever so slowly, the look in her eyes nothing short of menacing. She watched Michalchuk closely, as if trying to intimidate the man. Michael Chuck yelled at the bear to keep moving her on. Bad move. In an instant, the sow put her ears down and her head back, her mouth open, those sharp teeth glistening in the sun. It was a terrifying sight. In a flash, she started charging at the man. The bear was furious. She, too, wanted to protect her children. Boy, this is not a very good situation, because I don't think I'm going to make it back to the house, Michael Chuck thought. But he had to try and save himself, for his children's sake at least. As soon as the bear started charging, Michael Chuck started backpedaling as fast as he could. At one point, the man lost his right shoe. The shoe almost tripped him up, but luckily Michael Chuck managed to remain steady on his feet. He had a plan. He waited until the bear was just across the driveway. Then he raised his shotgun and aimed at the bear's right leg. Michael Chuck shot, knowing this was his only chance. The bear tumbled on the ground, stunned by the shot. The man knew he had only seconds, so he took off running, not wasting any time to see what the bear did next. Turns out, the man made the right decision, because it took the bear only a few moments to get back on her feet and resume its chasing. By then, fortunately, Lawrence Michael Chuck had already dove in the door as quick as he could and slammed the door behind him. He made it back inside the house. He was alive. The family watched as the grizzly sow turned to her cubs. The four animals left together. The man later reported the incident to BC conservation officers. Michael Chuck's wife uploaded the video on YouTube. In a write-up attached to the video, Michael Chuck provided further details. There was no blood, no hair, and I know she'll be sore, but she'll now think twice about approaching people. I talked it over with the local conservation officers, showed them the video, and they said I was totally justified in defending myself and family. I'm just glad it was me and not the kids out there, he wrote. But the video sparked a wave of controversy, with people criticizing his decision to shoot at the bear. But Michael Chuck defended his actions, arguing that he'd never intended to hurt the animal, hence the use of birdshot. I didn't want to blind her by hitting her in the face, so aimed at her right side to hopefully trip her up to buy me enough time to run inside the house, the man explained. That bear was not going to leave, he said. It probably worked out good because the bear's alive and I'm alive.